American titan and a worldwide icon. As more and more of his questionable dealings and troubling associations come to light, Walt Disney's story has gotten a lot more complicated in recent years. He brought so much joy into this world, but the chilling darkness behind his magical persona is always looming. Whatever you think, one thing is for sure. Almost 60 years after his death, we're still living in Walt Disney's world today. Born in Chicago in 1901, Walt Disney was the fourth son of Elias and Flora Disney. A few short years later, Walt was followed by the birth of the Disney family's only daughter, Ruth. Walt would go on to enjoy a quintessential American upbringing, something that would color much of his future work. Disney spent his childhood on the move. From his birth to the age of 15, his family uprooted 3 times, first to Marceline, Missouri, then to Kansas City, before finally returning to Chicago with his family in 1917, where he would finish high school. Despite all this moving, the town of Marceline in particular had the most lasting impact on a young Disney. In 1917, Walt was back in Chicago and acting as the cartoonist of his school paper, often drawing patriotic images for WWI. By mid-1918, he was no longer satisfied with watching the conflict from the sidelines. He tried to join up, first with the forces and then the Red Cross. However, he was turned down as too young, as he was still only 16 years of age. Disney didn't let that stop him. Not letting his previous rejection get in his way, Disney forged his birth certificate, changing the date of birth to increase his age, and successfully applied again to join the Red Cross as an ambulance driver in September 1918. Disney actually shipped off to France, but while his scheme did work, it was too late. They signed the armistice before he arrived. Despite peace having been negotiated, the Red Cross elected to send out 50 men to aid with the fallout from the conflict. Walt was among them. He spent this time primarily as a chauffeur and truck driver. However, he continued to find artistic endeavors, drawing cartoons on the side of ambulances and decorating helmets. He also got into a little bit of trouble. An urban myth involving Walt is that he was dishonorably discharged from the army. Walt was, of course, never officially part of the army, so he couldn't be discharged, honorably or otherwise. But that doesn't mean he was completely innocent. As usual, there was a grain of truth to the story. Disney was transporting much-needed supplies of beans and sugar to Soissons in February, when the truck burnt out a bearing, becoming stuck in snow. To the beleaguered people of France at that moment, beans and sugar might as well have been gold. As such, orders were that you never left your truck unattended. Young Walt Disney was in a jam. There were 2 people in the truck, Disney and a helper. They had also burnt out near a watchman's shed. They agreed that the helper would go back for help and Disney would stay with the truck. Disney sat there for 2 days with the watchman and no help came. Finally, on the 3rd day, Disney had enough. He left his post. Disney had been so tired after 2 days of sitting with no help. He went to town to eat and sleep. He slept for a day, and when he returned, the truck was gone. His helper, who reportedly got heavily intoxicated in the meantime, finally reported and got the truck while Disney was gone. Disney had broken the golden rule. As a result, he was court-martialed. They brought Disney before a board for judgment. Things were looking bad for him, and Walt was dreading the worst. He felt that the greatest disgrace would be to be kicked out of the Red Cross, you know? Fortunately, someone whom Disney had worked for came to his defense, pointing out that Disney waited for 2 days while his companion drunk himself to oblivion. They let Walt off, and he returned home with respect. After a year in France with the Red Cross, Disney returned to Kansas City and became an apprentice artist at the Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, starting a friendship with fellow artist Ub Iwerks. Unfortunately, by January 1920, they were both laid off due to a decline within the business. As a result, Disney and Iwerks began their first joint venture, Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists. But their bad luck continued. Considering the youth of both Disney and Iwerks, They failed to drum up any reliable business for their fledgling company. Disney left first, getting a job at the Kansas City Film Ad Company to provide temporary funds the pair could put back into their own company. Iwerks tried to carry on by himself, but in the end, joined Disney at Kansas City Film Ad Company a month later. It would change everything for Walt. It was at the Film Ad Co. that Disney caught the bug for animation. Borrowing a book and a camera, Disney began experimenting with animation on his own time. He came to the conclusion that hand-drawing every frame of animation, known as cell animation, was the ticket to success. However, the Film Ad Co. did not agree with him. They only wanted to create stop-motion cutout animations. So Disney struck out on its own again. Next, Disney and his new partner, Fred Harmon, created short cartoons for the local Newman Theater. Their success there allowed them to create Laugh-O-Gram Studios. There, Disney hired his old friend Iwerks, along with several other animators, in 1921. But this would prove another false start. Laugh-O-Gram did produce Alice's Wonderland, a 12.5-minute, single-reel live-action animated adaptation of Alice in Wonderland starring child actress Virginia Davis. The only problem? The company went bankrupt before they were able to release it. Was Walt Disney done before he started? Following Laugh-O-Gram's bankruptcy in 1923, Disney moved to Los Angeles, where his brother Roy was recovering from tuberculosis, and he brought Alice's Wonderland with him. At this point, he hoped to become a live-action film director. However, his attempts to sell Alice's Wonderland were failing, that is, until fate stepped in. Margaret J. Winkler was a recognized distributor of animation out of New York. She was losing the rights to the Out of the Inkwell and Felix the Cat cartoons, and needed something new to survive. In October of 1923, the Disney brothers signed a contract with Winkler for 6 Alice comedies. Walt and Roy formed the Disney Brothers studio to produce their new films, but they needed to lure Virginia Davis back. Offering her a contract of $100 a month, the Disneys persuaded Davis and her family to relocate to Hollywood so they could continue the Alice series. By July 1924, Walt had also persuaded Iwerks to move from Kansas City and join the team as well. It felt like things were starting to come together, but storm clouds were brewing with his distributor. By 1926, Winkler had given her distribution to her husband, Charles Mintz, and the Alice series was on its way out. Mintz wanted new material he could distribute to Universal Pictures, and Disney wanted to switch from the mixed form of creation he'd used with Alice to full animation. Disney and Iwerks created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, a figure that bears a striking resemblance to Disney's most famous mouse, and for good reason. In February 1928, Disney and Mintz were at a crossroads. Disney had ambitions to negotiate a larger fee for producing the Oswald series. Mintz wanted to reduce payments. Then, to further the conflict, Mintz persuaded many of the artists involved to work directly for him. Then, Disney discovered that Universal, not himself or Iwerks, owned the intellectual property rights to Oswald. Finally, Mintz put out an ultimatum. Mintz informed Disney that if he did not accept his reductions, Mintz would create his own studio and produce the series himself, cutting Disney out entirely. Walt decided to call Mintz on his ultimatum and paid the consequences. The majority of his animation staff went with Mintz, except Iwerks. The old friends were still together, but they had nothing to produce. It was looking grim. Disney and Iwerks may have had each other, but they needed a new idea and stat. Enter one Mickey Mouse, though at the time, Disney was calling him Mortimer Mouse. It was Disney's wife, Lillian, who thought Mortimer was too pompous. Instead, she suggested another name, Mickey. He had a name, but he needed a design. Despite taking the credit for Mickey Mouse, Disney had less to do with the creation than most think. Although Disney drew the initial sketch for Mickey, it was Iwerks who revised that sketch, making the character easier to animate and creating Mickey as known today. However, Disney wasn't done with Mickey just yet. At this point in his career, Disney was distancing himself from the animation process. He did, however, provide Mickey's voice from creation until 1947. One Disney employee said iWorks designed Mickey's physical appearance, but Walt gave him his soul. Mickey may have had life, but he needed a contract to survive. Mickey's first appearances didn't actually gain any traction. It wasn't until Disney created Steamboat Willie that Mickey found his fame. Inspired by the jazz singer, the original sound film, Steamboat Willie used synchronized sound and was the first post-production produced sound cartoon. This was when Disney partnered with former Universal exec Pat Powers, a partnership that would both help him and ruin him. Working with Powers and distributing through Powers' company, Celebrity Pictures, Disney created both pictures with Mickey Mouse and the Silly Symphony series. However, despite the success of these pictures, Disney and his brother Roy felt they were not receiving their share of the profits. And that wasn't the only problem. Trouble was brewing with iWorks as well. Despite playing a key role in the production of Mickey Mouse, as well as being the main animator for every single one of Disney's projects, iWorks felt that he was not getting the recognition that he deserved. So, when Powers offered to sign iWorks to create his own company in retaliation for Disney demanding more money, iWorks planted the knife in his friend's back and agreed. Walt Disney was once again on his own, and the cracks were showing. By October of 1931, the pressure of his feud with Powers, as well the additional work created by the loss of iWorks, were coming to a head. Disney had a nervous breakdown, which prompted him and his wife Lillian to take an extended holiday to Cuba and a cruise to Panama. Was this the end of his company? Disney returned from his break stronger than ever. He signed with Columbia Pictures to continue distributing Mickey Mouse and began creating new stars, like Pluto, Goofy, and Donald Duck. In 1932, he produced Flowers and Trees in full color, 3-strip Technicolor. Not only that, but he also negotiated a deal that entitled him to have the sole use of the 3-strip process for the next 3 years. Yet, while his business empire began expanding, he was losing interest in his work. Despite half a decade of success, Disney became dissatisfied with producing cartoon shorts by 1934. He felt that the future of animation was going to be something bigger. With that in mind, he began production on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first ever attempt at a full-length animated feature film. The industry nicknamed it Disney's Folly, predicting the time and work required to produce a full-length animated movie would bankrupt the company. And to their credit, the cards were stacked against him. During the 3 years that it took to produce Snow White, Disney's animators also revolutionized animation with the development of the multiplane camera. This cutting-edge technology added depth to animated pictures by allowing creators to place drawings on different pieces of glass at various distances. This discovery revolutionized animation, particularly for Snow White. Even though animation on Snow White was mostly complete, when Disney saw what the new multiplane camera could do, he ordered his animators to redraw several scenes, and the extra work was worth it. Despite the industry's doubts, Walt Disney got the last laugh. Not only did Snow White premiere in December 1937 to high praise, it became the most successful motion picture of 1938 period. But while his career was soaring, his reputation was about to take an irreparable hit. Neither Pinocchio nor Fantasia, which both released in 1938, performed well at the box office, and the Disney company began to quickly find themselves sinking in debt. It has been suggested this is why Walt agreed to give Leni Riefenstahl, a propagandist for the Nazi Party, a tour of his studio. A month after the Kristallnacht shook the world. Maybe he didn't realize it, but with that one decision, Walt Disney tarnished his reputation forever. The rumors that Walt Disney was an anti-Semite stem largely from this meeting with Riefenstahl. In truth, most historians believe that the tour was more likely motivated either by financial need or simple ignorance, not malevolence. But the damage to his reputation was done. And wouldn't you know it, by 1940, his company was in dire straits again. Maybe it was karma. On the one hand, Iwerks' studio folded in 1940 and he returned to Disney. On the other, the Disney company was in debt and the conditions for their employees were rapidly deteriorating. Many animators took cuts following 1938's film failures, and there was no uniformity in pay for employees. They were tired of putting up with it. In 1941, led by animator Art Babbitt, who was openly critical of Disney, Disney's animators went on strike, demanding that Disney unionize his studio. Disney refused, giving a speech to his employees telling them, "If you're not progressing as you should, instead of grumbling and growling, do something about it." Unsurprisingly, this only made things worse. At no point during or after the strike, which lasted 5 weeks, did Disney take any responsibility for it. He continued to blame those who were striking for not being happy with their lot, even going as far as to accuse communistic agitation for the strike. It was a bitterness that would last long after they resolved the strike, without Disney. In the end, they resolved the strike, though Disney was not present for much of the negotiations. He accepted a goodwill trip to South America, designed to remove him from the tense situation. Several of the animators refused to return to work for him and never forgave them, stating that by losing them he got rid of the chip on the shoulder boys and the world owes me a living lads. The strike was over, but it had changed Walt Disney forever. Perhaps in response to the strike against him, Disney's views became increasingly more conservative as the 40s went on. In 1946, he was a founding member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, an organization committed to preserving the American way of life against the threat of communism, fascism, and kindred beliefs. Disney would later leave this group, but not before he caused irrevocable damage. In 1947, Disney put his grudge against those who headed the strike against him into action. He testified in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee that 3 former animators and labor union organizers were communist agitators, stating that the strike they led was an attempt to gain communist influence in Hollywood. These men were subsequently blacklisted from working in Hollywood. Disney pushed his enemies down while he rose. The 1950s began to see the Disney company shift from animated features to live-action features. Walt, however, was focused on a bigger passion project, building a clean, unspoiled park where the entire family could have fun. Inspired by Denmark's Tivoli Gardens, Disney purchased land in 1952 and began work with his Imagineers to create his vision. It would change the world. Disneyland opened in July 1955. Its opening ceremony broadcast on ABC to 70 million viewers. The American public was enchanted by Disneyland's themed parks, connected by Main Street USA, which was modeled after the Main Street in Marceline, Walt's childhood home. After a roller coaster of ups and downs, Disney had returned to a roaring success, and the best was yet to come. Throughout the remainder of the 50s and early 60s, Disney continued to produce feature-length films and television shows, many of which remain popular today. In 1964, Disney produced Mary Poppins after trying to gain the rights from author P.L. Travers since the 40s. Mary Poppins would be one of Disney's crowning glories. However, it would mark the end for Disney himself. Walt Disney was a lifelong smoker. When they announced the dangers of smoking, Walt promised his daughter that he would switch to filtered cigarettes, which he did. He just removed the filters before smoking them. He rationalized this by saying, "I promised her I'd use them, but I didn't tell her how I would use them." While stubborn to the end, it did not stop the fact that the end was coming. In early November 1966, Walt Disney was diagnosed with lung cancer. Although treated immediately with the latest technology, they'd hospitalized Disney by the end of the month. He passed in hospital on December 15th. Walt Disney was gone, but his legacy lived on. Disney was working on projects right up until the day his body forced him to stop. In the end, he played a role in 81 feature films. He received 59 Academy Award nominations, winning 22 of them, making him the record holder for both. His success is undeniable. His reputation is a little more questionable. In the years since Disney's passing, the Disney company has only continued to grow. It has also been repeatedly scrutinized for the choices it made both during and after Walt's passing. As an animator in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, many of Walt's creations are products of their time, colored with ingrained prejudices. However, whether you believe him to be an American icon or a symbol of the problems with society, you cannot deny that Walt Disney created magic that lives long after him. Despite all his success, one tragic mistake haunted Walt Disney until the end of his days. Flush from the success of Snow White, Walt and Roy bought their parents a home in California, built with all of the latest technology, including a state-of-the-art heating system using the newest technology, natural gas. But while well-meaning, it wasn't long before this gesture began to cause problems. Almost immediately, the Disneys began to have problems with the home's fancy new heating system. The brothers sent over a repairman from their studios to fix the malfunctioning system. However, the system was too new. The repairman would make a mistake, with dire consequences. On November 26, 1938, Flora and Elias, Disney's housemaid, discovered the couple unconscious on the floor of their new home. With the aid of some neighbors, the maid dragged them both out of the house, but only Elias recovered. By then, it was already too late for Flora. Walt's mother succumbed to carbon monoxide inhalation in the house that he had bought for her, and it was a loss that he never fully recovered from.